He told me my voice would slow down his wedding. That same voice is the only reason he has one. Sit with that a second, friends, because I sat with it for about 4 months before I could say it out loud. My name is Ray Kessler. I'm 63 years old. I've lived in Fort Worth, Texas my whole life, most of it in a work truck with a tape measure in the door pocket. Up until this past spring, I would have told you the worst thing that ever happened to me happened on a Tuesday night in October of 1999, and that it was behind me. I would have been wrong about that. It was never behind me. It was just waiting. Welcome back, friends. Pull up a chair, get your coffee, and do me a favor, hit that like button and tell me down in the comments where you're listening from today. I read every one of them. This story's going to take a while, and I talk slow. You'll understand why before we're done. Let me start where it broke. At a lunch table at a country club out on the west side. The kind of place with dark green carpet and a portrait of somebody's grandfather over the fireplace. River Crest, old Fort Worth money. Families that have had the same table since before the interstate came through. I was there for a planning lunch. 7 of us. My son Dylan, 33 years old, sitting up straight in a blazer he'd have laughed at 10 years ago. His fiancée Sloane on his right. Her parents, the Whitakers, who talked about their ranch outside Weatherford the way other people talk about weather. My ex-wife Diane, 2 chairs down, laughing at everything. And Marcus Vane, Diane's husband, Dylan's stepfather, leaning back with his arm hooked over the chair like he'd built the building. Man's been calling himself a capital advisor for 11 years. I've never once heard him name a client. 26 years I raised that boy. 26 years and I'm at the end of the table with the water pitcher. We got to the order of service. Sloane's mother had it printed on cardstock. Processional, blessing, welcome, toasts. And I saw my name wasn't on it. I'd already made this easy for them. That's the part I want you to hear, friends, because it matters. 3 weeks before that lunch, I had emailed Dylan a blessing I'd written for him. 4 sentences. 61 words. I'd timed myself reading it out loud in my kitchen 1 minute and 9 seconds, which is slow. I know it's slow, but it's 1 minute and 9 seconds. And I'd told him in that same email that if he'd rather, I'd record it ahead of time and they could play it. Or I'd write it down and let Ruben read it in his own voice, and I'd just stand there. 3 options. I gave him 3 ways to say yes. Dylan set his fork down and looked at me with an expression I'd seen on his mother 1,000 times. Dad, he said, I love you, but you know how it is when you talk. The table got quiet in that particular way. Mrs. Whitaker started studying the butter. It takes a long time, he said. And people get uncomfortable. They don't know whether to look at you or look away. There's a videographer, and the whole thing's live streamed for Sloane's grandmother. And it's a lot of dead air, Dad. He'd practiced it. I could hear the rehearsal in it, the way you can hear it when a man's already said something to a mirror. Marcus is going to do the blessing, he said. He's good on his feet. He knows the room. Then he put the last one in, slow and gentle, which is the worst way to put a thing in. You can sit with Aunt Dana. There's a spot at the back where the audio doesn't pick up much anyway, so you won't have to worry about it. So I wouldn't have to worry about it. Nobody said a word. Marcus at least had the grace to look at his plate. Diane didn't. Diane looked like somebody had finally taken a bag off her shoulder. I want to tell you I had something ready. Some line that would have turned that room upside down. I didn't. I've gone back over that lunch more times than I can count. And every time, I do exactly what I did that day. I picked up my tea glass, set it back on the coaster, and squared it up with the edge of the coaster because my hands needed a job. Then I stood, told them all thank you for lunch, and I walked out through that green carpet without another sound. I don't remember the drive. I know I took I-30 West because that's the way home, and I know I sat in it a while, and I know I never turned the radio on. What I remember is catching myself at a light with 2 fingers pressed against the side of my throat, up under the jaw where the skin doesn't match, feeling for whatever it is my son hears when I open my mouth. Like, maybe if I pressed hard enough, I'd finally hear it too. I didn't cry, friends. I want that on the record. Ray Kessler does not cry on the interstate. But there was something sitting on my chest the whole way to my apartment off Hewlin, and it stayed there while I let myself in and dropped my keys in the dish and stood in a kitchen too small to pace in. I've got 1 room, a kitchenette, and a folding table in the corner by the window where the light's good. On that table is a cigar box I have been meaning to turn into a real photo album since the Clinton administration. I sat down on the floor with my back against the wall and opened it. Top photo. Dylan, 7 years old, at the counter at Merle's on Camp Bowie, peach cobbler on his chin, my hand around the back of his neck. Both of us squinting because Merle never would fix that window blind. And it all came back at once, not gently, like a door coming off its hinges. You want to know who I was before all this? I'll tell you. Every Saturday, no exceptions, I picked that boy up at 9 in the morning. I ran a sheet metal outfit ductwork, custom flashing, attic work in August that'll take 10 years off a man. I'd still have the smell of galvanized steel on me. We had a route, Merle's for cobbler, because he'd eat peach cobbler at 9 in the morning and think he'd gotten away with something. Then downtown to the stockyards for the 4 o'clock cattle drive, and if his legs got tired, I'd put him up on my shoulders on Exchange Avenue so he could see the horns come by. He'd holler down at the drovers. That's my dad. Every single time. To men who had no idea who I was, and waved anyway. There was a fella named Reuben Salas we'd see out there sometimes, off duty, in a ball cap, city firefighter. He'd give the kid a 2-finger salute off the brim, real serious, like he was reporting to him. Dylan thought that was the greatest thing that ever happened to anybody. Those Saturdays were the best hours of my week. Better than a paid invoice. Better than the Cowboys, which in fairness was not a high bar in those years. I had no idea how few of them were left. It was October 3rd, a Tuesday night, about 10:40. We were in a little brick house off Balmar with a laundry room on the back wall. That laundry room shared a wall with the electric meter, and that meter had been arcing on and off for 11 months. I had called it in, twice. There is a work order in a file somewhere with my name on it and a date on it, and a second one under it, and nobody ever came. I woke up because the smoke alarm in the hall went off, and by the time my feet hit the floor, the back half of that house was already going. I got Diane out the front. I remember her on the grass in her robe, and I remember turning around and understanding, in about a quarter of a second, that Dylan's room was on the other side of the hallway from where I was standing, and the hallway was orange. There wasn't a decision, friends. I want to be honest about that, because people want to make it into courage, and it wasn't. There was no thought in my head. My body just went. I got a blanket off the back of the couch, soaked it in the kitchen sink, and I went down that hall. The ceiling insulation was already burning and coming down in pieces. He was on the floor by his bed, which is where they always are, because they get low like the school tells them, and then they don't know what comes next. I put that wet blanket over him, and I got him up against my chest, and I turned my back to the worst of it, and I put my face down over his head so he'd have something to breathe that wasn't that air. That's the part that cost me. Not the burn, the air. I got about 4 steps into the living room when a rafter let go and came down across my jaw and my shoulder. I don't remember hitting the floor. I remember being on the front lawn, with grass in my mouth and a man's knee beside my head, and it was Reuben Salas, first company on scene, prying my arms open to get the boy out. Dylan didn't have a mark on him. Not a blister, not a scratch, not so much as smoke in his lungs. 7 years old, and he walked away from that house clean. I didn't. 9 days on a ventilator, a trach for 5 weeks. My jaw is held together with a plate you can feel through the skin if you know where to press, and it healed a ½ inch off from where it started, so my face doesn't line up the way it used to. But the throat is the thing. Superheated air scars the airway and the cords, and scar tissue doesn't stretch. It took me 14 months of therapy to talk in full sentences again. What came out at the end of all that is what you're hearing now. Gravel and slow, and every so often a word just parks itself and won't come. Reuben still calls me every October 3rd. 26 years. That man has never missed. Says he's checking in. He's not checking in. He just knows. I'd go back down that hallway again. 100 times. That was never the question. The question, the one nobody thought to ask me for 26 years, was what it was going to cost me afterward. You'd think a man who did what I did would get a little credit at home. Some grace, the benefit of the doubt on a bad day. Diane filed 15 months later. I sat across a conference table from her downtown with a speaking valve in my throat and a legal pad, because talking still wore me out by noon. She wouldn't look at my neck. Not once. "You should have waited outside for the department, Ray," she said. Flat. Rehearsed. "You panicked. You're reckless with him, and I can't undo that." Reckless. I would have laughed if laughing didn't hurt. And here's the thing that took me 20 years to understand, friends. She knew. She knew better than anybody in the world what happened in that hallway. That's what made it so much worse. That wasn't ignorance talking. That was guilt wearing a mad face, because it is a whole lot easier to be furious at the man who went in than to sit with the fact that you were the one standing on the grass. She got primary. I got every other weekend, and then every other weekend if the schedule worked, and then the way ice melts you don't notice until you're standing in the water. And, somewhere in those years, she rewrote it. Little pieces came back to me secondhand. Dylan telling a teacher his dad got hurt because he ran in without thinking. Dylan at 14, in my truck, out of nowhere. "Why didn't you just wait? They were right there. Not what happened to you. Why didn't you wait?" And then the other one. He was 12. Sixth grade awards night at his school, and I was going to hand him something in front of the gym, and he asked me in the parking lot if his mom could do it instead. He said it real quiet. He didn't want the microphone to have my voice in it. I said, "Sure, buddy." I sat in the third row and clapped. 21 years, friends. That boy heard one version of me 5 days a week, and I got him on Saturdays if the schedule cooperated. You do that math and tell me who was going to win. She took the proof of how much I loved him and turned it into evidence. The case against the utility took 4 years. Prior work orders, ignored inspections, a maintenance policy their own people had written memos about. It was ugly, and it was well documented, and we won big. The kind of number that changes what a family is. I never spent $1 of it on myself. Not one. I know how that sounds. My own attorney, a patient man named Paul Ainsworth, sat me down and told me I could buy a house on the hill and never work again. And I sat there in the same steel toes I'd worn to his office the first day, and I told him no, because Diane's voice was still in the back of my head saying reckless. And some broken part of me had decided that if I ever enjoyed that money, it would prove she'd been right that I'd traded my boys home for a check. So I put every cent of it into a trust for Dylan. Irrevocable, protected, and discretionary, with me as sole trustee. Which is a lot of words for one simple thing. Nothing came out of that trust unless I said it came out. And I kept working. Kept the shop going till my 60s, kept the same one-bedroom apartment, kept a Silverado with 206,000 miles on it. That I serviced myself in the carport because I was not about to pay a man to do what I could do. People thought I was tight with $1. Let them. I was holding a boat for a kid who by then could barely stand to sit across from me at a table. Diane married Marcus Vane when Dylan was 19. Blazer on a Tuesday. Leased German cars swapped every 2 years like they were work boots. He never took a nickel from me directly. He knew the vault ran through me and he wasn't getting past it. So he went around. 2 things happened that I'd take back if I could. 4 years ago, Dylan started a design-build company. Nice work, good crews. Banks don't hand a 30-year-old a real line of credit on charm, so I pledged trust assets to guarantee it. He asked me to, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. 2 years ago, Diane and Marcus were about to lose the house in Westover on a note Marcus had gotten sideways. Dylan came to my apartment and asked me, sitting in my one chair, to backstop it so his mother wouldn't have to move. And I did that too. For a woman who called me reckless in a lawyer's office. That's the whole thing, friends. Every load-bearing wall in that family ran through a man they wanted seated where the microphone couldn't reach him. And Marcus knew it. He'd been circling for years. He talked to Dylan about positioning ahead of distributions. Smart structure. Protecting what's coming to you. Big talk from a fella who has never in his life had anything of his own to protect. He put a stack of paper in front of Dylan one night at the kitchen island and told him it was routine. It wasn't. It was a personal guarantee for a fund Marcus was raising, pledging Dylan's future trust distributions as security. And a bank won't take a discretionary trust as collateral unless the trustee signs off. So Marcus signed for me. He forged my name, friends. He forged the name of the man whose signature took 14 months of occupational therapy to make legible again, and he figured he'd clear it out of the first close before anybody looked twice. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew, sitting on my floor in the dark with a photograph of a boy with cobbler on his chin, was that my phone was ringing. A man will go into a fire for free. He will not pay for the privilege of being ashamed of himself. That's what I decided in that dark, and everything after comes out of it. Fort Worth number, 8:40 at night, I answered. Mr. Kessler, this is Andrea. I'm with the private client group. I apologize for the hour. Papers, moving on her end. Sir, your annual re-execution came due and I've got 3 items sitting in the queue. The operating line for Larkspur Build, the residential note we're servicing, and there's a draw scheduled Friday against the guaranteed line for the Rivercrest event. I just need your authorization to renew and I'll get out of your evening. Is everything all right? Is everything all right? I sat there on my floor with a photograph in one hand and a phone in the other, and I looked at the way the streetlight came through my one window, and I heard myself say something I did not know I was going to say. No, ma'am, it's not. Quiet on her end. Don't renew them, I said, and it took me a while to say it the way things do. She waited. God bless her. She waited. None of the 3. Sir, I want to make sure I have that right. If we don't renew, the Friday draw fails. There's a deposit at the club that's non-refundable. 48,000, I said. I know what it is. And the operating line would go to demand, and the residential note would reprice under the default terms. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Kessler, I'd hate for... Let it go, I said. All 3. Let all of it go. And I hung up, and I didn't call my son, and I didn't call his mother. I sat in the dark with a 26-year-old photograph and let the quiet do the talking. I'll tell you something true. That was the first time since 1999 I felt like I had my hands on the wheel of my own life. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. That word gets thrown around cheap, and it doesn't fit what that moment was. It was a man finally saying no more, out loud, in the only voice he's got. Friends, if you're still with me, and I know that was a lot, do me a kindness and hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed so this finds you next time. Because 3 weeks after that phone call, my son knelt down on my apartment floor and begged me for money, and I remember every single word of it. He called at 7:22 the next morning. I was standing at the counter with oatmeal, same as every morning since he was in kindergarten. I let it ring twice, mostly to see if my hand would shake. It didn't. Dad, what did you do? Not. Good morning. Not. I've been thinking about lunch. What did you do? The bank called Mom. They said you pulled everything. The club payment failed, Dad. They're saying the deposit's gone. That's $48,000, and my line's frozen. I've got payroll Thursday. I know what day payroll is, I said. I made payroll for 31 years. Why would you do this? His voice cracked, and I felt the old pull. 33 years of being somebody's father does not switch off. Fix it. Smooth it. Apologize for something you didn't do. I didn't apologize. You told me not to talk at your wedding, son, I said. So I quit talking to the bank, too. He went quiet. I could hear Diane behind him somewhere, asking what was going on. That's cruel, he said finally. That word sat down behind my ribs and made itself at home. No, I said. It's just finished. I hung up before he could answer, which is a thing I'd never done to that boy in my life. Then it came apart, and it came apart fast, and almost none of it was me. Thursday, Larkspur's payroll bounced. The florist and the caterer and the band all came back declined inside of 6 days. The note on the house in Westover repriced overnight, and the payment about tripled. And Diane went to the internet. My neighbor Marguerite knocked on my door on a Sunday holding her phone out like it was hot. Diane in her kitchen, ring light, good lighting on the tears. My son's father is holding his wedding hostage because another man was asked to give the blessing. He's bitter about his injury, and he's punishing a child for it. She tagged half the community pages in Tarrant County and this is the part, friends, she tagged the Whitaker's family business. For about 4 days, I was the worst man in Fort Worth to a few thousand people who have never met me. But she'd made a mistake she couldn't take back. Old families like the Whitakers don't fight in public. They don't even stand near a public fight. She thought she was pointing them at me. What she actually did was drag a mess onto the porch of people whose entire religion is not having a mess on the porch. And then the floor gave out under Marcus, and I didn't lay a finger on it. When that residential note repriced, an automated payment failed, and a failed payment on a file that size doesn't get shrugged off, it gets flagged, and a human being in compliance pulls the whole relationship to see why. That auditor pulled every document with my name on it, including a personal guarantee for something called Vane Capital Partners. They called Paul Ainsworth to verify the trustee's signature. Paul looked at it for about 6 seconds and told them the truth. Ray Kessler never signed that page. By that Wednesday, it was not a family argument anymore. It was a federal bank fraud investigation. They froze Marcus's accounts and called his loan. He came to see me Friday evening. Stood at the edge of my carport in a blazer, hands out, wearing that smile. Ray, buddy, this is a paperwork problem. We can unwind this in a week, if you'll just... I let him talk. I'm good at that now. Then I said the only thing I said to him. You'd better talk fast, Marcus. I'm the slow one. He left. 2 days later he left for good, packed a bag in the night, and didn't wake his wife to say it. Diane's sister Bev, a woman who hadn't spoken to me since a funeral in 2016, called to tell me. Said Diane woke up to an empty closet and agents at the door with a warrant. These hands paid for that closet, friends. And the fella whose voice was smooth enough to bless my son's marriage was in Arizona before the coffee got cold. The Whitakers heard about the fraud investigation the same week. Small city. Everybody's one phone call from everybody. Sloan called it off on a Sunday. Nice girl, I think. Raised by people who count risk and reputations. So, no venue, no fiancé, no stepfather, no house. Every one of those things had my name written on the underside of it, holding it up, right up until I stopped holding it up. I didn't feel joy, friends. I want to be honest with you. It felt like watching a house of cards come down that I poured the slab for and never got thanked for pouring. They knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after that lunch. Diane's makeup was gone. Dylan looked like he hadn't slept since the phone call. I stepped back and let them in, not because I owed them the doorway, but because I wanted to say what I had to say sitting down, and I wanted them to have to watch me say it. Dylan didn't sit. He went down on the carpet in front of my chair, and I'd be lying to you if I said watching my son do that didn't do something to me. Dad, please. His voice came apart in the middle. I know what I did at that lunch. I know. But the company's gone. They called the line. I laid off 9 guys. Mom's got 30 days on the house. Marcus forged your name, Dad. He used me. The agents said he pledged my distributions. He stole from my own future, and I signed it. I signed it because he told me it was routine. Diane was crying, the careful kind of crying that has worked on a lot of people over the years. Just release the trust, he said. Please. Some of it. Any of it. And then he said the thing I never saw coming. I remember Saturdays, he said, barely above a whisper. He was looking up at me, and for 1 second he was 7 years old at a counter on Camp Bowie. I remember the cobbler. I remember the cattle drive at 4. I remember. And he stopped. Say it, son. Finish it. His mouth opened. Something moved behind his eyes. Something old, something buried under 21 years of somebody else's careful construction. And I sat there, and I watched him decide not to. He looked at the carpet instead. And whatever had almost come up went back down. He knows, friends. Somewhere under all of it, he knows exactly what happened in that hallway, and he still could not put it in the air. Not even on his knees. That's when the thing in me closed for good. I got up, slow, the way you get up when you've decided something instead of when you're reacting to something, and I sat down at my little table by the window where I eat breakfast by myself. I waited until he lifted his head. Then I unbuttoned my collar and turned my chin so the light hit the side of my neck where the skin is a different color than the rest of me. You didn't want 90 seconds of this voice at your wedding, I said. I took my time. I let every word take exactly as long as it takes. So you're going to sit there and get all of it. He made a sound like the wind went out of him. I went into that hallway with a wet blanket because you were on the floor by your bed, and the department was 4 minutes out and you did not have 4 minutes. Slow, every word. I put my face over the top of your head so you'd have something to breathe. The air is what did this, not the fire. The air I took so you wouldn't. Diane had gone gray. Her hand was over her mouth. I burned my voice out of my own throat, I said. so there'd still be one in yours. And you stood in a country club and told a table of strangers it takes too long. Nobody moved. I carried you out one time, son. My voice didn't shake. I want that on the record. Not once. I'm not carrying you again. Dylan knelt there on my carpet and stared at my throat like he was seeing it for the first time in his life. And maybe he was. 26 years of Saturdays and a settlement I never spent, and it took losing every single thing I quietly paid for before that boy would look at the scar and understand what it was. I stood up and I walked past both of them to the window, and I pulled the blinds. I heard the couch let go. I heard the door. Then quiet, none of the ring lights, none of the tagging, none of the country club, just quiet. I'll give you the rest fast, because you've earned an ending and I don't believe in dragging one out. They were out of the house in 31 days. Last I heard through Bev, they're in a 2-bedroom in Haltom City, which is about the kind of place I lived in for most of my adult life while they had a pool. Marcus was indicted in the fall. Wire fraud. False representation of collateral. A list of them. He is currently living in a state he's not allowed to leave. Waiting on a date he cannot talk his way out of. Never once picked up a phone to check on the woman he married. And the trust. Here's where I know some of you are going to disagree with me, and I want to hear it in the comments. I didn't leave it sitting there for him. Paul and I moved every dollar of it into a charitable foundation this past January. It's called the Dylan Kessler Fund, and it lives at the Children's Hospital here, and it pays for airway reconstruction and burn care and speech therapy for kids who breathe something they shouldn't have. My son's name is on a wall in that lobby, and he will not touch one dime of it as long as he lives. There's one letter in Paul's file, with Dylan's name on it. It opens the day that boy says out loud, to anybody in this world who isn't me, a coworker, a bartender, a stranger on a plane, what his father did in that hallway. Not an apology. I don't want an apology. Just the truth, spoken where somebody can hear it. Reuben will know if it happens. Reuben always knows. That's not up to me anymore. That's up to him. As for me, I did something last spring I hadn't done in 26 years. I bought a truck I didn't have to fix. Drove it out to Big Bend and sat on a rock for 4 days and looked at country I'd been meaning to look at since 1988. Got a blue healer out of a shelter in Weatherford who's deaf as a post, which suits us both fine. She watches my hands and never once hurries me. And there's a woman at Merle's named Loretta who refills my cup and asks me questions and then just waits. Never finishes a sentence for me. Do you know what that's worth, friends? 26 years and I'd forgotten. Reuben called on the 3rd, same as always. I told him the whole thing. He was quiet a minute and then he said, "You did right, Kessler. Not the money. The hallway. 26 years ago you did right." And then he said something I've thought about every day since. You know how many men I pulled off a lawn who never got the chance to be a disappointment to anybody? Their kids would take you slow and crooked and every bit of it. I know, Reuben. I've always known. It just took the rest of the world a while to catch up. Some Saturdays I still go down to Merle's. I still order the peach cobbler, and friends, I've never once liked peach cobbler. Not really. I just liked watching a boy eat it. And at 4 o'clock, if the weather's decent, I'll walk down Exchange and stand at the rail and watch the Longhorns come by. And every so often there's a kid up on somebody's shoulders hollering at the drovers. And every one of those men waves back like it's the most important job they've got. I'd go back down that hallway. 100 times. 1,000. That was never the question, and it never will be. The question was whether he'd ever be able to say it out loud. He hasn't. Not yet. But this voice isn't waiting on him anymore. If this one hit you somewhere, hit that like button and subscribe, and tell me down in the comments where you're listening from today. I'll see you next time, friends.